The Via de la Plata is a spectacular but totally uncompromising ancient Spanish pilgrimage that starts in Seville, deep in the south of the country. From here, it cuts the country in two as this 1,000-kilometre walk heads north past the major cities of Zafra, Mérida, Cáceres, and reaching the halfway point at Salamanca, Spain's Golden City, then turning northwest at Zamora as it heads towards the coast and the sacred city of Santiago de Compostela, where legend has it the remains of the apostle St. James are interred. Seville, a lively, vibrant city. It's best known for its bullfights and flamenco, and with a population in excess of 700,000 inhabitants, it's the fourth largest city in Spain and the capital of the Andalusia region. This city is an important centre for the south of the country, but it also boasts a great reputation for its nightlife, with its many restaurants and tapa bars. Founded and named initially as Hispalis by the Romans, the city is a mix of Moorish and Christian culture, and its old town contains no less than 3 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Seville is sprawled across the plain of the Guadalquivir, and its old city is found nestled alongside the banks of the river. This is the same city that inspired the myths of Carmen, Don Juan, and Figaro. Seville's most popular attraction is its huge cathedral. The Cathedral of St. Mary was built in the 15th century, and this huge monument is the largest Gothic church in the world. Its Arabian bell tower, La Giralda, was a former minaret of the 12th century mosque that the cathedral was built on top of. At 94 metres high, this tower dominates the skyline and was once topped by 4 copper spheres that acted as a beacon that travellers could reputedly see from a whole day's journey away. The cathedral is a wonderful feast of inlaid marble floors, bedecked with priceless sculptures and paintings, and beautiful stained glass windows, overlooking the many rib vaults where altars are inlaid with gold and silver. Less than 100 metres away is the Alcazar, a Moorish palace, and another heritage-listed treasure. This is a great example of Almohad culture and Mudéjar art, and within the grounds lie the famous Alcazar Gardens. It's a great idea for a pilgrim to spend a few extra days exploring this wonderful city of contrasts before that big trek north. We start the Via de la Plata from the west side of the imposing cathedral. On the side gate, there's a stone doorway with a statue of St. James and his apostles, and on the footpath opposite is a tile with the Via de la Plata inscription. Follow the road to the right, and you'll pick up the first of thousands of Camino signs on the Calle Garcia Vinuesa. The first stage is to the ancient Roman town of Gelina, and our trail takes us through the outer suburbs of the city to the tree-lined town of Camas. Just past the pretty village of Santa Ponce, history enthusiasts can explore the ancient ruins of Italica, one of the earliest Roman cities in ancient Spain. We arrive at the nature on a wide crushed gravel path that navigates through endless fields of cotton and sunflowers for almost the whole distance to the first night's stop. On this stretch, there's no shade whatsoever on the journey to the village. Stage 2 of our Camino is to the larger town of Castelblanco, and the walk is over rolling hills planted with sunflowers and olive groves. This is a relatively short stage, so before long we enter the picture postcard village of Castelblanco. After even 2 days of walking, a pilgrim might have already experienced the joys of sleeping on bunk beds in an albergue. Indeed, your nights could have sounded a little bit like this. Some good advice for anyone contemplating walking this Camino is to take along some earplugs, maybe a few pairs of earplugs, because it won't be unusual to spend some nights lying wide awake in an albergue and listening to the constant drone of one or two of your fellow pilgrims snoring. The third day's walk to Almaden is the hardest so far. We spend the first 16 kilometres walking gradually uphill on a quiet country road. The signs on the side of the road remind us just how far we have travelled. Take plenty of water and supplies on this stage because there's no facilities available until we reach our journey's end. Eventually, the Camino heads into the Parque Natural Sierra Norte and a forest of cork trees before heading into the nature and more steady climbing. This pleasant walk ends at the base of the hills, and there's a very steep climb up and over the Sierra Norte. At the top, there are great views of the landscape and an idea of what a pilgrim will be walking through in the following days. The sleepy village of Almaden lies a short but dangerously steep descent away, so some care needs to be taken on this final leg. Almaden is another pretty village with all the services and amenities you might need, including a public health centre.
I think not to worry.
Your feet are the most important part of you on this Camino. A long walk on the hot tarmac road and the steady climb could well test your footwear. And it's on this type of surface feet problems like blisters or tendinitis can emerge. It's very important to treat hot spots straight away before a blister becomes so bad you're forced to rest up for days or even retire completely. Your boots should be light and able to wick moisture, and the same applies to socks. It's a good idea to break your boots in well before you start the Camino. On our way to El Real de la Jara, we encounter the famous black pigs, native to the Iberian Peninsula. The jamón ibérico, made from these animals, is considered one of the world's most exquisite delicacies. Siesta is very important in the south of Spain, especially in the summer months, and even the animals here know how to appreciate the opportunity to rest their eyes. This is another shorter day walking through different farms and meadows. A medieval fort guards a pretty village of Real de la Jara, with its whitewashed stone houses and narrow streets. What's nice about this pueblo is the first house the pilgrim comes to is the albergue, where he's to stay the night. Not long after leaving Real de la Jara, we passed by the ruins of the Castillo de la Torres, an imposing castle used by the Christian knights to guard the trail. We are walking over rolling hills, through miles of oak forests carpeted with wildflowers. As we come closer to the town, we follow a trail through a forest of eucalyptus trees, before eventually entering the larger pueblo of Monasterio. From Monasterio, we enter Extremadura, Spain's most remote region. The landscape changes to wide open expanses, with glistening fields of wheat and toiled farmland on either side of us, and a huge sky above us. Extremadura is a large, sparsely populated and flat lowland, with long stretches between the villages. Fuente de Cantos is the 6th stage of our Camino. On the way to Zafra, we pass through the small village of Calzadilla de los Barros, with good prospects for a café con leche and a pastry. This Camino is very remote, and often there'll be no villages to break your day's journey. The oak trees have given way to olive groves and vineyards, with spatterings of flowers in the fields. We enter the first major town of the Via de la Plata via Zafra's old disused railway yard. Zafra is also known as Sevilla la Chica, or translated into English, Little Seville, thanks to the similarities in its architecture, especially in its courtyards and white houses and alleyways. The town lies in the centre of Extremadura, on a plain at the foot of the Sierra de Castella. The city's imposing fortress, or Alcazar, is its showpiece, and this impressive intact castle is surrounded by a network of narrow streets and courtyards, that form its medieval quarter. Villafranca de los Barros is the 8th stage of our Camino, and on the way to this village we navigate through the sleepy town of Los Santos and our last chance for any supplies before we head into the nature. Extremadura is one of the last remaining unspoilt regions of Spain. Butting up to Portugal in the west and ringed by glorious mountains, this region has more water in its boundaries than any other region in Europe. Villafranca de los Barros is a large town that sits in the middle of a wide plain in the centre of the Badajoz province. It's the 8th stage of our Camino. Another wonderful sunrise greets us on the next day, and the walk to Torremejia is mostly on a wide dirt road that runs straight and flat for almost the whole distance between the two towns. And if you like olive groves and vineyards, then this surely is your lucky day. The flatlands of Badajoz provide ideal conditions for grapes and olives and are usually farmed on large estates called latifundios. This might be a good day to enjoy listening to some music on your earphones as you cover the 28-kilometre journey to the next pueblo on a relatively easy and flat trail. The large white storks will be a common sight in spring and summer, building their nests on high vantage points, especially church steeples. The short trek into Mérida is through fields and meadows as the city appears early on the horizon. With more ancient Roman monuments than any other city in Spain, Mérida is an ancient history teacher's delight. In its early days, it was regarded as one of the most important cities in the Roman Empire and boasts the largest existing Roman bridge in existence today, which crosses the river Guadiana and is still in use by pedestrians. Our albergue lies next to the river, before the city's entrance. The city itself is a busy tourist centre, as more and more people from around the world discover what's often been described as an open-air museum. Among the more popular things to see in Mérida include the Roman theatre, where the ancient forms of art were enacted. This is a well-preserved semicircular auditorium that used to seat 6,000 spectators in Roman times. The circular amphitheatre was where gladiator combat games thrilled the crowds. There are many more treasures here, including the Temple of Diana and the famous Moorish citadel, the Alcazaba. The amazing Aqueduct of Miracles, a Roman marvel, stretches across the north of the city for almost a kilometre. This huge aqueduct was used by the Romans over 2,000 years ago to bring water down from the reservoirs and filter it into the city. Its sheer size is breathtaking and pays tribute to an ancient civilization of incredible ingenuity. From Merida, we have a short journey to Proserpina, a Roman-built reservoir, which even today supplies the city with its water. This is a long trek. Some pilgrims might decide to break their journey at Al Hussein, a tiny village on the way with a pleasant albergue. A lot of the day will be spent in the Parque Natural de Conalvo, where the landscape is scrubland and pasture, and miles of home oak. Our accommodation in Alquescar is a convent, which is also a facility for caring elderly homeless men. And remember, while you're travelling light, your washing will mainly be done by hand when you finish your day's walking. On the way to Cáceres, we pass through Aldea de Cano, and this is another opportunity to break up a long hike, especially if your legs are weary from the previous day's marathon effort. The walk to Cáceres is the 13th stage of the Camino, and this is one of the largest cities we will navigate through on the Via de la Plata. The historic quarter is World Heritage listed, and the old city is made up of cobble streets, set amongst medieval homes and Renaissance palaces, with towers dominating the old Arab walls that contain the old town. The city of Cáceres has been described as the most authentic medieval and Renaissance city in existence today. The menu del dia translates into the meal of the day. This great Spanish innovation comes about from the Spanish government's decree years ago for all bars, restaurants and other eateries to produce an affordable daily meal for the people of the country. Typically, for about €10, the Menu del Dia will provide a starter, a main course and a dessert, as well as some bread and in most cases, some liquid refreshment. A long day ahead means an early start, and that brings with it another glorious sunrise and a full moon, which allows us to walk without the aid of the night lights. The trail from Casa Caceres is on a gently undulating limestone path that eventually changes to the blacktop as we approach the Embalse Alcantara, the second largest reservoir in all of Europe. The albergue might at first resemble a bunker built into the side of the hill, but the facilities and welcome here are as good as any on this Camino, and the views are simply outstanding. Pilgrims who intend to stay at Grimaldo need to be aware that this small town has only one bar and one restaurant, and no shops whatsoever. Any supplies for the following day's walk will need to be purchased at Canaveral, which is a slightly bigger town on the way. On the way to Carcabosa, the trail starts on some hilly and rocky terrain. Eventually, we are walking on pasture land as the Camino travels on to Galisteo. As we pass through the fincas or farms along the way, we are always reminded to close the gates behind us. We pass a solar panel farm on the outskirts of Galisteo, part of Spain's push for renewable energy. In 2013, Spain produced 54% of all its electricity needs from renewable sources. The old town's centre is completely enclosed by a 13th century stone wall, which was built in the Moorish occupation. On the way out, we come across more giant white storks with their young in their familiar stick nests. On such a long and remote pilgrimage, it's quite important to pack lightly. Realistically, a pack should contain only the basics and weigh no more than 10% of your body weight. A fleece and a rain jacket will be important, but remember, most of the items you might need will always be available in the larger cities. The next stop is Carcabosa, a busy town with a number of bars, supermarkets and restaurants. On the Via della Plata, the stage to Aldo di Camino can be long and confusing. The 39-kilometre trek has one highlight, which is the Arca Capara, the only existing Roman arch left in Spain today, and it lies amongst the ruins of the city of Capara. Pilgrims need to pack plenty of food and water on a trail that has no real stopping points. There are two other options a pilgrim can take to break the long journey into 2 lesser days of walking. One is to detour after the Capara to the Hostal Asturias on the N630 at the Jarilla junction, and another is to walk into the town of Plasencia. Both of these destinations are well signposted for you on the trail. Whichever way a pilgrim decides to complete this stage, it will be a welcome relief to finally walk into the village of Aldo e Neve. The 18th stage of the Via della Plata navigates through Banos de Montemea, an important town on our Camino, because from here we leave Extremadura and climb onto the Meseta. This town boasts some restored original Roman baths and therapeutic thermal springs, making it an ideal stopover for weary pilgrims who might like to treat themselves to some well-earned rest and recovery time. From here, the trail heads uphill on an old Roman road, and the views looking back at Banos Montemea, nestled in the hillside, are sensational. The tiny village of La Casada is our overnight stop, and with a population of just 92, it delivers us some great examples of how pretty the Spanish householders can make their balconies. We have entered the province of Salamanca, and from here on, we follow the yellow triangles. This is another easy flat walk to a Fuenterrobel de Salvatierra. The popular albergue here is run by Father Don Blas, who has been a great advocate for the Via della Plata, and his albergue is a large communal centre, loaded with artefacts and history, reminders of this particular Camino. Today we climb over the Pica de la Duena. The strenuous climb to the top amongst the giant windmills delivers us some wonderful views of the surrounding countryside. Before us lies the Meseta, a vast tableland that covers much of central Spain. And to the north, we have some idea of the terrain we will be covering in the coming days. Eventually, we descend into the tiny town of San Pedro de Rosados and our night's accommodation on this, the 20th stage of the Camino. The walk to Salamanca is mostly along open fields, with some forests of home oak. It was on the same ground in 1812 that the Duke of Wellington won a decisive battle against the French army, commanded by General Marmont. That battle turned the tide of the Peninsular War, and Napoleon's army never recovered from the defeat. Salamanca is a world-famous university city, and it appears sprawled on the landscape ahead of us. Our trail leads us straight into the city's outer suburbs. Salamanca is the halfway point of our journey so far, and that means we have walked for 500 kilometers. We crossed the Rio Tormes on the Puente Romano to enter the old city. Salamanca is another UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's known as Spain's Golden City, being so rich in architectural, gastronomical, and religious culture. It attracts thousands of international university students each year, so there's a real youthful buzz about the city. The huge Plaza Mayor is considered an open-air masterpiece and is the largest square in all of Spain. This is a city that deserves an extra night's stay. The trail onwards from Salamanca leads us onto the huge flat tabletop of the Meseta, with its distinctive reddish soils cultivated for fields of cereal crops. Even the sky seems to have a greater presence against these endless flat plains. The landscape of the Meseta is ideal for crop farming and cattle grazing. Our walk to Zamora is 32 kilometers, with no villages in between for food or water, so it's essential we stock up the night before with supplies. And don't forget your hat. There's very little shade to be had on the Meseta. The city of Zamora lies on a rocky hill at the base of the Duero River. Zamora is most famous for its large number of Romanesque churches and its delightful restaurants, and of course its Toro wines. Our next stage moves along the same flat countryside as we head to the tiny village of Montemata. On the walk from Montemata, the scenery changes briefly as we ascend and descend some steep hills, before we arrive at the reservoir, the Embalse Ricabeo. This reservoir is part of a huge hydroelectricity project being built on the Rio Esla. Before we arrive at our pueblo, we pass the remains of a huge castle, hundreds of meters long, overlooking the water, and one can only imagine the thriving society it supported in times gone by. Granja de Moruela was the 26th stage of our Camino, and from here we change direction and head northwest towards Orense. Early on, the trail navigates through more steep hills, before opening up to some wonderful views of the Rio Esla and the picturesque Roman bridge that spans the river. The Rio Esla is one of the 3 great rivers that run through this region and feed the Meseta with water for irrigating the vast tableland crops. Tabara's distinctive church tower marks the end of our day's journey. On the way to Santa Croix de Terra, we see ahead in the distance the mountains of Galicia, bringing us ever closer to Santiago de Compostela. On the outskirts of the town, we come across a number of bodegas built into the earth, a common sight in this area. Our next day's walk to Rio Negro del Puente is 29 kilometers and a trek through forests of eucalyptus and poplar trees. And we pass through the tiny village of Calzada de Terra before rejoining a trail walking through endless vineyards. There are some wonderful views of the Rio Terra and the impressive hydroelectric dam as we cross the long bridge that spans the river. From Rio Negro, it's less than 300 kilometers to Santiago. The stage of the Via de la Plata to Pueblo de Sanabria can be a long walk of over 40 kilometers. Some pilgrims might decide to take advantage of a smaller 10-kilometer walk to the popular town of Mombay. Others will travel on to Asturianas, where there is an albergue in the sports center, but it'll only accommodate 7 pilgrims. Otherwise, there's little in the way of infrastructure between these two stages. The castle of Pueblo de Sanabria was built in the 15th century and was the scene of many battles. It was considered to be almost impregnable because of its position, high on a bend, protected by the merging of the 2 rivers, the Rio Terra and the Rio Castro. Today, the town still has most of its original walls that protected the old city, and it still has its huge castle keep in its center. Pueblo de Sanabria still retains its narrow cobblestone streets, its ancient homes and its manners. It's as if time here has stood still. At a height of almost 1,000 meters, there are some great views to be had of the surrounding countryside. The 32nd stage of our journey is to Lubian, and importantly, the Camino now leaves the long flat meseta and enters the Cantabrian Mountains. The long, flat, dry trails with their brown and reddish colours are now replaced with a much greener countryside. The hill town of Recuello provides a welcome coffee stop before the grueling climb ahead of us. The pretty valley of Sanabria lies below us, as we walk the final kilometres to Ljubljana. Ljubljana is a delightful village, built snugly into the hillside above the valley. Today is another tough day of climbing, initially through scrub and ferns, and then through oaks and chestnut trees. The rewards are more beautiful scenic views. The stone millenarium welcomes us into the magical region of Galicia. More pilgrims have joined the Camino in Puebla de Sanabria, and we've made some great friends to share our journey with. From here, we climb again through rocky trails with more heavenly views. After a while, the trail levels out, and below us we have our first glimpses of the larger township of Egudina, where our albergue awaits us. After such a hard day's climbing, the next morning, when we walk out of Egudina, we seem to be on top of the world. An early start on a paved road takes us from the village, and soon we're walking on top of the mountains in Galicia. The road meanders through a number of tiny hamlets with stunning views all around us. Below us, we glimpse a huge reservoir called the Embalse de la Portas. After 20 kilometers, we must descend steeply into the village of Camposeras. This village will be our only chance for refreshments until Lhasa. From here, we climb again and enjoy more great vistas. Eventually, we descend into the popular town of Lhasa and the end of an incredibly scenic day's walking. The stage to Zunqueira de Ambia begins with a very long and steep 5-kilometer walk to the tiny village of Albergaria. In the tiny village, we find a great treasure of this Camino. There is a bar where the rooms are filled with scallop shells, bearing the names of pilgrims that have walked the same paths previously. We were invited to add our names to the many thousands already on display. We pass through the large town of Vilar de Barrios, another pueblo with an albergue where a pilgrim can break their journey. Eventually, we reach our night's resting place at Zuqueira de Ambia. On the way to the large city of Orense, we're walking almost entirely on the blacktop. This large metropolis appears before us in the distance, but takes quite a few hours to eventually reach. Orense has become a popular starting point on this Camino by virtue of the fact it's just over 100 kilometers journey to Santiago de Compostela. And because of this, a pilgrim walking from here will be able to gain a Compostela when they reach the city of St. James. The uphill trek to exit Orense is extremely difficult, but the views of the city as you leave it behind seem to make this all worthwhile. The trail undulates over hills through pine trees and forest and joins the blacktop at various times, before entering the village of Sia, famous for a delicacy called pan de Sia, a bread that's dark and hearty and made only here in this town. Our journey takes us towards the semi-industrial town of Salida. This is quite a large town with a population in excess of 2,500 inhabitants and with all the facilities a pilgrim might need. The accommodation here is in the hostels and restaurants and at very reasonable prices, making it an ideal place to stop over. A grey Galician morning greets us on the second last stage of our Camino to the remote albergue at Autierio. From Salida, the trail is a pleasant mix of farmland, fields and woods. On the way, we pass the tallest high-speed railway bridge in the world at Ponte Ula. The long viaduct is 630 metres from end to end and crosses the River Ula at a height of 117 metres. The descent into the town of Ponte Ula is amongst the steepest on this whole Camino, so great care needs to be taken with those worn-out knees. The final day's walk into Santiago begins fittingly with a morning mist. The nature soon gives way to the city's outer suburbs. From about 3 kilometres away, we can see the twin spires of the cathedral. The walk is into the giant Piazza Obradoiro, and it marks the end of an unforgettable 1,000-kilometre journey that covers almost the entire length of Spain. There are still, however, some things that need attending to. Firstly, a trip to the Pilgrim's Office to receive a well-deserved Compostela, proof of our efforts. And secondly, a visit to the magnificent cathedral, and maybe even a prayer to St. James for making this whole journey possible in the first place.